The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to our National Road Safety Partnership Program webinar. We drive the way we live, insights into safer driving for work. So this webinar is proudly brought to you by NRSUP and really discuss the links between living, working and driving. So my name is Jerome Carslake and I proudly manage the NRSUP and its many activities. So to find out more about the program, please visit the NRSUP website and sign up to the newsletter. Now, I'm proud to introduce our presenters today. I've actually got quite an easy ride. I get to sit back and we have Dr. Robert Isler and Nadine Isler, I should say, and they'll be interviewing each other. So welcome to you both, and where are you joining us from today?
Thank you. We're joining you from sunny Hamilton today in New Zealand.
Well, I can proudly say Melbourne's got a beautiful day here as well for a change. We are very grateful to have you on board and to give us your time. So a quick bio. Robert Isler is Associate Professor at the University of Waikato, is it?
Yes, yeah, correct.
I got that straight off. Director of Traffic and Road Safety Research Group at that university. So he's also Head of Research at Fleet Coach, which are the leaders in some online driver training, has 30 years of research experience in applied cognitive psychology of human factors, performance and road safety. So we have a fantastic person on board, and he's also been the recipient of the Brake Charity Fleet Safety Award in 2016, which is an outstanding commitment to road safety. Joining him is Nadine Isler, and she is a registered psychologist with a background in health psychology and has 8 years in developing educational training programs in the area of road safety. With her background in journalism and literature, I dare say she's going to be asking some fantastic questions today. So, what we have on board today is 60 minutes. We'll have plenty of time for discussion, and we will be recording today's session as well, which will be shared on the NRSP website and circulated to everyone after it as well. As with all webinars, we really do love our audience to ask questions, so please feel free to type them on in. We'll be passing them on through to Nadine as we go along, but opening up a lot for discussion at the very end. So I know everyone's itching to hear from Robert and Nadine, so let's jump on in.
Thanks very much, Jerome. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So we're going to be talking about the biggest risk that most of us face every single day, which is driving. It's something that lots of us do for work, to and from work, or just in our spare time, and there's actually quite a lot that can go wrong. This webinar isn't just all about the dangers, though. We've also got some key insights on how to train, how to know who's at risk, and what to do about it to keep staff safe. We'll start by talking about the research, how it applies to work, and then talk about best practice when it comes to driver training. It's the important stuff. You'll notice that we take a scientific approach. So you'll get to hear about the latest studies and findings when it comes to humans actually on the road. We're big fans of science around here. And Dr. Robert Isler, as you've heard, he's the expert on this stuff, so I'm going to be asking him some questions today. Good morning, Robert.
Good morning. Good to be here, and thank you for listening.
So, Robert, you've talked in the past about the 5 key insights that you've picked up through all of your research. So I'm going to ask you a little bit about these. So, first one, we steer where we look. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? What does that mean?
Yeah, this is quite an exciting insight that we had quite early on when we did research. And what we found is that it must be a very strong link between the brain part that controls eye movements and the part of the brain that help us steer, controlling the head, the hand movements. And in a simulator, for example, we found that drivers, when we superimposed a stimulus over a road scene, over a road, we can easily do this in a simulator. Actually, the drivers were driving in the direction where the stimulus went, randomly moving, rather than where the road was going. And that, of course, created a very uncomfortable and dangerous ride. So again, we were able to see the importance of eye movements in driving.
Ah, so it was something like a dot moving around that they would follow instead of the road, is that right?
That's right, yes.
Oh, wow. Doesn't sound great. And you used an eye tracker to do that research, did you?
Yes, eye trackers are really ideal to observe eye movements, actually where people look when they drive, where they focus with their central vision. As we know, central vision only covers about 3 degrees of the visual field, and the rest is blurred peripheral vision. So we need to move our eyes, and we need to move our eyes efficiently. Look at places where the information is for safe driving, where all the hazards are.
That sounds like it makes sense. So what happens when people lose control of their car? That often happens. What's the story with that?
Yeah, that's quite interesting. Very often at the end, just before they lose control, decide, and they perhaps see a tree and say, "Oh, I don't want to drive into that tree," but they focus on the tree, and that can it's like an autopilot of steering into the tree. And so the advice really would be to look at the place where you want to go and not where you don't want to go. And it's a bit like a life philosophy in a way.
It's kind of terrifying, isn't it? The thought that at that last minute, the one thing that you're trying to avoid the most is what you actually end up steering towards.
Yes, yeah, and I was always wondering, there is so much space between trees, why always they hit, the trees. This is quite interesting.
Right.
So it has something to do with eye movements and steering.
Oh, okay. So that was, we steer in the direction that we're looking in, and so the takeaway from that is look in the direction that you want to be going.
Yes.
Okay. So insight number 2 then, most drivers are poorly calibrated. So what does that mean?
Poorly calibrated means, most of the drivers actually think they are much better drivers than they are. And it's sort of, they overestimate their driving skills and underestimate the task demand of driving. And when that happens, of course, then people are sort of engaging in second and third tasks, in multitasking. And that is, of course, very dangerous, because they feel driving is easy and they can do all sorts of things besides driving. Yeah. And that is not a good thing, because multitasking is really a myth, as we know in cognitive psychology now.
So because somebody thinks that they're a better driver than they actually are, they might decide to do a whole bunch of stuff while driving. Yes, absolutely. Of course, now with mobile phones, they are now banned. But there are lots of other opportunities for getting away from the road with your attention. Right. Okay. And I think you've said that a lot of people very often have poor insight into factors that impair their driving. They don't realise actually how important, how dangerous something like multitasking actually is. Yes, and it's interesting. The insight is not only about their driving skills; it's also about how dangerous fatigue could be, and about physiological factors. It's very poor sometimes. The insights people have. So a lot of people think they're more or less untouchable. That's right, and because driving is so easy, whatever you want to do. In addition, it's fine. It's not a big deal. Mm. And I think we've got a statistic. For all the impairments. We've got a statistic here somewhere. So more than 80% of drivers overestimate their driving skills. So that feels like a statistic that can't be accurate, right? If that many people all think that they're better than they are. Yeah. Otherwise, we have a problem with the average. So that's not possible. And that's a real big issue. Yeah, with driving. Okay, so we know what people think. So what actually makes a good driver then? Yeah, it's quite interesting when people talk about their driving, what they see as a good criterion for good driving is not actually evidence-based at all. When people say, I just bought a big newer model car, what does that mean about their driving? I don't have any speeding tickets. That does not say that they are safe and good drivers. So if you're sitting behind your computer right now and you're reading some of these statements thinking, oh, that's what I've always said to say that I'm a good driver, maybe time to think twice. Absolutely. And
and just be more aware of the incidents that you create when you drive.
Because I mean, these are all things that we would say quite often, right? I see terrible drivers everywhere, and compared to them, I'm not so bad. I'm actually a reasonably good driver because look at all those mistakes.
Yes, true. But yeah, I mean, there's always a worse driver than you on the road. That doesn't make you a good driver.
Ah, okay. So what about some statements then that do make for good insight?
Yeah, and you list all those statements. Actually, it's really interesting. These are all statements that and motorcyclists would do. Motorcyclists are much more vulnerable to crashing or to be hurt when they have an incident than car drivers, and they are used actually to look ahead and anticipate what is happening, focus only on the task of motorcycling. And I think if we would all be motorcyclists or drive the way that motorcyclists drive, I think we would actually be pretty safe.
Okay, so because they have to take more care of themselves on the road and be more aware, they develop these better insights, do you think?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
Right. Okay.
Otherwise, they would really put themselves hugely at risk.
Okay, so we've popped up a couple of examples there on the screen, different sorts of insights that are really beneficial to have. So being prepared for different conditions, knowing what you in fact don't know, being able to check in with yourself and determine if you're okay to drive. So all these things actually make more of a difference to safer driving.
Yes, yes. Knowing what you don't know, that's an important a skill in a way. Metacognition, self-evaluation, really, having good insight into behaviors that you engage in.
Rather than assuming that you know more than you do. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so that was most drivers are poorly calibrated. Insight number 3. So training needs to use a coaching approach. Okay, so what does that mean? What's the best way to teach?
Yeah, what we realize is, people actually don't like so much a top-down instructional approach, someone who tells you what to do. I mean, I think, Einstein once said, I love to learn, but I hate to be told. And I think the coaching gives people ownership of the learning, and it's much more effective. That is what research showed. Rather than telling people what to do, actually allow them to discover themselves. What are my weaknesses? Where can I improve? Where are my strengths?
So the focus is actually on the learning, on the person gathering the information, rather than a one-way flow of the information.
Right, yeah, and being reflective, taking ownership of the stuff that needs to be, and that should be learned.
Okay, so then how do you train in a coaching way? What sorts of things would be different than if you were doing it in a top-down teaching way?
Yeah. The approach that we found is very useful is, displaying video scenarios, and then allow people actually to realize where the hazards are and click on the hazards, and then ask also, for example, about risk management strategies. What would you do in this situation? And so that then people realize, perhaps I need to anticipate, where the hazards are. That gives me more time to react, and, discovering all these good, safe, defensive driving behaviors.
So it sounds like working out the answer yourself, gathering the information yourself, rather than being told what the answer is.
Absolutely.
So having the space and time to actually answer the question yourself.
Yes.
Makes a big difference.
Makes a big difference. And research has shown this again and again, that people also enjoy the learning process much more than when there is an instructor telling you what to do.
And does enjoying the process mean that you remember the material better, the information better? Absolutely,
absolutely. When you discover it yourself, then there is a psychological effect of it's sticking, rather than something that perhaps you cannot take ownership of when people tell you.
Makes sense, I guess, discovering something yourself and wanting to learn it as opposed to being told what to do.
Right.
I think we can relate to that. Okay. And you also say that that everybody can improve their skills, so that everyone can actually improve. So what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think everyone can, step up, with driving, even if people actually are quite good drivers, they can still try, to save perhaps more petrols by driving smoother, looking further ahead and anticipate and really focus and not, being distracted and all this. And I think everyone has room for improvement.
Okay, well, that's quite an optimistic view, really, isn't it? You were talking earlier about everybody's perceptions of their own driving and the hazards and mistakes that can be made, but actually what you're saying is that using the right training approach, the right teaching approach, everyone can improve in some way.
Yes, and it's enjoyable, to be a good driver. Actually, there are good benefits. It gives you a smoother ride, for the passengers that are in the car, and saving petrol as a fuel, and it just makes it much more pleasant.
But it's certainly nicer when people actually want to get in your car and drive with you.
Absolutely.
Less stressful for you. Okay, so that was insight number 4. Almost everyone can improve. And so insight number 5 is that the way that people drive is directly related to how they live their lives and how they do their work. So what does that mean?
Yeah, we had this idea when we were driving in Northland, in New Zealand. We were on a rural road and we were actually driving at speed limit, 100 kilometers per hour. And suddenly there was a driver behind us driving too closely. And we couldn't believe, at the time when there were 2 yellow lines, between the roads, this person overtook us. And in a crest, and was not able to see what's actually coming. And just by sheer luck, avoiding crashing. So this person did actually everything wrong that you could, driving too closely, overtaking dangerously, driving too fast, and then almost lost control in the next curve. So very often we have a very negative, of course, response to such drivers. We say, we should impound the car, we should punish the person, and I can see from where people are coming from because they put everyone at risk. But we also could take perhaps a more compassionate approach and could say, this person really perhaps doesn't value, was actually a male at that point, himself as much as he could and should, and perhaps is not compassionate enough to see that, his life is so valuable, and not only his life, also, of course, the life of the others that are involved. And you can ask, in what space actually this person is mentally, psychologically. And it's really interesting from that experience on. I thought, perhaps we need to test, how much the drivers actually appreciate their lifestyles, and their lives. And we asked them several questions on, how meaningful they think their life is, how engaged they are, or how much pleasure people experience during the day, and things like this. And we found this extreme strong correlation between how people judge their lifestyles and the number of incidences they would report they have experienced in the previous 6 months. And an incident was defined as a fine or a near miss or a crash. So, we can really ask, how does a driver who actually puts so many people at risk, like that driver who overtook dangerously, how does that driver actually look like, not in a good place.
So it sounds like it goes beyond mental state then. It's also how much that person actually values themselves, their own lives, their current lifestyles, how much enjoyment they're getting from their day-to-day, which sounds like it really impacts the risks that they then go on to choose to take while they're in their whole demeanour while driving, by the sounds, that they're more likely to take risks and do, sort of dangerous, silly things behind the wheel when they also feel like their lives are perhaps less satisfying. Is that
Absolutely,
right?
absolutely. And then there was sort of the thinking, and we got this data that is very correlated data of lifestyle ratings and number of instances people experienced. And then we thought, when you live a good life, that means also that your working life is perhaps quite satisfying. So we then asked in quite a few organizations, how do you enjoy your work? Work satisfaction, and also work performance. And again, we found these huge correlations between people who rated their work satisfaction very highly. They had less number of incidences in the car. And then, of course, it became extremely interesting, because then, this driving behavior is almost like a surrogate measure for work performance and work satisfaction.
Oh, that's interesting. So you can actually then make the link the other direction. And I guess because for many of us, our working lives are a very big part of our lives and our satisfaction and happiness. So it makes sense that if you're enjoying yourself and you're feeling that job satisfaction, that's going to correlate to other areas of your life, especially driving.
Yes, and for us it was particularly an interesting result, because normally work satisfaction and performance you assess with questionnaires. They're all self-reported and they have a bias in there, But when you actually can measure driving behavior, objectively with telematics, and then use this as a surrogate measure for work performance and satisfaction, then it really becomes very, very exciting.
And so is that where stress and burnout, the negative side of mental state at work, is that where that comes into all of this?
Absolutely. I mean, burnout was one of the best indicators of having had crashes, and incidences.
So there's a strong link between burnout, which is extreme stress, and crashes.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. And the other way, works as well. If people enjoy their work and do well, good well-being, again, rated very low on the scale of number of crashes and number of fines and near misses.
Okay, so it goes both ways. So I guess that's where flourishing drivers come in.
Yes. So flourishing drivers, very often have, rate their lifestyle very high, and also have good work situations, enjoy their work and do well at work, or in families. So their private lives are often, they are often engaged in their private lives, and they engage in meaningful activities. They experience the so-called flow feelings, where they can fully immerse in the present moment. They have pleasure on top of engagement and meaning. They are neither bored nor stressed. They are mindful to the present moment, have good emotional and impulse control, great self-management skills. They do not ruminate or mind wander. They are assertive but not defensive, or kind, generous, loving, normally have good relationships, good families, and they crash less than people who are, stressed. It's not rocket science in a way, but no one actually has done some empirical research on that.
Interesting. So flourishing, satisfying lives also lead to safer drivers.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. So can you tell me a bit more about what's the evidence behind that?
Yeah. So here you can see in the next slide is on the y-axis the life satisfaction scale. So this is just the way that people rated their level of satisfaction with their life based on meaning, engagement, and pleasure. And on the x-axis, you've got intention to violate traffic rules. And you can see the intentions correlated very strongly with life satisfaction. So people who intended, to violate traffic rules like driving too fast or overtaking dangerously, these people rated their life satisfaction as very low.
So can I just check something for a second? Intended to commit violations, so they knew they were going to, they planned to, and they didn't care. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So right. They predict what they would do, their behavior, their driving behavior in the future, which, right, by the way, correlated very well with what they have experienced in the past, number of crashes.
Right. So they accurately could measure. I have done a lot of speeding up until now. I will probably keep speeding.
Absolutely.
And that correlated with their life satisfaction.
Yes.
Oh, that's very interesting. So what do we, talking about mental health, what do we know about the kind of mental health states, I guess, that are most common across an average population when you're talking about flourishing people and these people with less life satisfaction? What's the normal? Yes,
we've got a normal distribution, and the reality is that actually not so many people of us are actually flourishing in a way that that I explained before. Most of us have moderate mental health. Some of us are languishing, sort of are between moderate mental health and perhaps having even a mental issue that's languishing. And then, of course, the clinical cohort, people with mental problems, with mental issues on the left side of the normal distribution. So there are lots and lots of people who actually could improve their wellness, from average or from languishing to flourishing, from average to excellence. And that's where positive psychology comes in. Positive psychology tries, instead of making miserable people less miserable, to move average people to excellence, languishing to flourishing. And this will have a huge effect on their driving, how safe that their driving is. And not only that, it has an effect in families, communities, and companies, of course, as well.
Wow, that makes sense. So moving that average, going back to that graph there, moving that average up the line so that more people are sitting in that flourishing area.
That's right.
Rather than doing some kind of fixing technique, I guess, on those that are lacking in some way.
Yes. And so we try to move the whole normal curve to the right,
mm-hmm.
And we have to be aware that when we do this, being happy does not mean absence or not being depressed. When people are not depressed does not mean that people are happy and flourishing. We need an extra effort, to move from average to flourishing, to get people into flow feelings, getting people into places where they feel comfortable and at ease.
Right. And I guess that's all the stuff you talked about before, right? Engagement in meaningful activities and feeling not stressed, more bored, and having really good impulse control and all those kinds of things. So it's not good enough to just be not depressed, but actually flourishing means all of those positive aspects as well.
Yes. And they don't need to engage into maladaptive strategies, to cope with anxieties and depression. That's very often, speeding and engaging in risky behaviors. It's a maladaptive coping strategy, to an underlying psychological issue.
Right. So trying to do something to feel better.
Yes.
Right. Okay. So I guess the takeaway from that, flourishing drivers are safe drivers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's, I think, that research showed very clearly, and that gives us a lot new ideas, how to improve the wellness of drivers in companies, in families, communities.
Okay. So let's move on now to hazard perception, which is something that we hear about quite a lot. Why the emphasis, particularly in the training program that you talked about earlier, Fleet Coach, why the emphasis on hazard perception, and why is it so essential to the research you've done?
Yes, I have been grappling with that question a long time. Why is hazard perception the only skill, driving skill, that is directly related to crash risk? And then I realized actually that all the other factors that we know are really quite dangerous, risky, not paying attention, being fatigued, part of having, under the influence of drugs and all this, inattention, actually impact all on hazard perception. And hazard perception is the prerequisite for good risk management. If people see hazards late, then they have very little time to respond to or to manage risks.
That makes sense. And so I guess going back to what you were saying earlier with the eye movements.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. The eye movements are so crucial for good hazard perceptions, and it's incredible to see the different patterns of inexperienced drivers compared to experienced drivers or impaired drivers. How suddenly the eye movements actually become very restricted, focused on very small parts of the visual field rather than on all the different areas. Young drivers, for example, they focus very much right in front of the car. They don't search in many areas. And also their fixation time, so their time they focus on particular hazards, it's much longer than experienced drivers would have. It takes them longer to extract the information content from a hazard to actually realize, wow, this is a hazard. It takes longer time.
So they're looking in the wrong place. They're not scanning as much, and when they do pick something out, it takes longer to assess that it's in fact a hazard.
Absolutely. And good visual search is actually a prerequisite for hazard perception that is so crucial.
Okay, so first step is eye movements, training eye movements.
Absolutely, yes. And that's what most of my time in the lab I've spent, is to train people on eye movements, and showing them video simulations and putting marks at the places where they need to look, in the more ahead, and anticipate, traffic constellations that will happen in, perhaps in 5 seconds, and predict what happens next, and all these kind of exercises. And it's incredible how fast actually people improve their eye movements and become very, very good.
Oh, good. So that's another optimistic thing to rely on, I guess, that people actually can train these eye movements, which we know now are so important. So let's compare improved hazard perception with impaired. So improved?
Yes, improved. Certainly, when people have good situation awareness, are aware what's going on around him, and are always, on the lookout for hazards, have good visual search, and also pay attention to the current moment, to the current situation, that actually improves hazard perception. That gives people the extra time to respond to risks and manage those risks. And then that the flow-on effect of good hazard perception is fuel savings, safer drivings, of course, and smoother driving as well, because people don't get surprised, by hazards when they see them early enough, and can change their driving.
Right, so a lot smoother all around, which makes for a lot safer and even saves petrol.
Yeah.
Okay, and so what What about impaired then?
Yes, and this is, impaired. These are all the risk factors that we know. Distraction, inattention. The naturalistic driving study showed that's the study that driving performance or looked at real driving performance, and people were very often inattentional blindness and so on. and as I said before, all these factors that we knew all along, these are no good. This is really dangerous for driving. They all impair hazard perception. And then that's the result of that is abrupt stopping, risky driving, speeding, following too closely, overtaking dangerously, because people actually are oblivious to hazards, don't see them or see them too late.
Right, so lots of downsides as well, which I imagine then makes driving even riskier, which makes hazard perception even worse because you're going so much faster and so on and so forth. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So let's come back to training drivers then. So given we know all this information now, so what would you say your philosophy, if you like, in terms of driver training?
Yeah, driver training. First, I think we need to make sure that actually people start to evaluate their behaviors and having insight into factors that may influence their behavior, their driving, and actually be critical about how people drive. So this would be the philosophy, and then actually teach the hazard perception. Teach good eye movements, and then I should say coaching eye movements and
teach in a coaching way.
In a way,
yeah,
that's right.
Good. We've got this great quote here. The learner driver shall, after the education, achieve increased insight in the advantages of avoiding risks, and the opportunity to realistically assess his or her driving skills, which I guess covers a lot of what you were saying before about how the learner themselves will get that insight rather than being told what they need. They will actually learn it themselves and has that element of assessing their driving skills much more realistically, not over-calibrating, not overestimating, rather. That's right, yeah. The miscalibration is one of the major problems in driver training. When people go into driver training, very often people actually increase their sense of skills they have too fast, and that causes then even more miscalibration. So we have to give them the chance to realistically assess and evaluate their driving skills, and make sure that these these skills are not out of kilter. So if we learn too quick, it can actually be dangerous because we think we've nailed it. That's right. Too early. And then we change our behaviors according to our calibration, reaching to risky driving faster because we feel that we have, got sussed it out. And I guess we've all had that experience when learning to drive, haven't we? That you can't drive at all and you think you'll never be able to learn it. And then one day you all of a sudden very quickly improve. So that's a risk by the sounds of it. Yeah. And car handling skills, they improve so quickly and people get the wrong sense of skills. So run us through the specifics that we should be training. Yeah, as a calibration skills, having insight, and I think that's not only in driving, metacognition, objectively observe your behavior, or the behavior of the person who needs to be coached, is really, really important. Calibration skills I would almost put on top of the list. Okay. So we want to train how to know what you don't know. Right. And creating insights and behave accordingly. Yeah. So knowing that, I'm
actually quite fatigued at the moment, and I shouldn't be driving. At this point, rather take a nap or so. These are insights. Not drinking, of course. Focusing at the task at hand, not being distracted, not ruminate. Perhaps, just treat the car like a sanctuary and enjoy the ride. And focus at the task at hand in the present moment. It's a bit like, mindful driving. Mindfulness is a big thing at the moment, and I think it can be applied to driving as well. Being not judgmental and focusing at on the task at hand.
Right. So it sounds like making good decisions is a big part of that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And higher level skills rather than car handling skills. So you touched on that before. So the manual car handling skills, not the place to be training?
No, I would focus more on visual search. And then, of course, hazard perception, so that all the impact, all the factors that impact hazard perception are becoming minimized. And, of course, situation awareness, being aware what's going around the car, 360 degrees, at any time. Being focused.
So all that higher level stuff rather than the physically knowing how to turn the steering wheel and park the car and that kind of thing. Okay, and so talk to us about how this can be trained with video.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of video simulations, because you can create traffic constellation that perhaps take quite a long time to encounter in real driving. And then you can actually see where people look and watch and anticipate hazards, and you can give feedback, and you see immediately on the eye movements when you have an eye tracker whether the person is just focusing on a narrow area close to the car, and we can do all the changes that are needed relatively quickly.
And I mean, I guess, there are some benefits to training from behind a computer screen rather than out on the road. Yeah.
First, of course, it's much safer. You can only crash the computer and then a car, and as we have seen, you make lots and lots of progress in a very short time period. And it's not only, safer, it creates smoother driving and fuel savings, and has all these great benefits.
Mm-hmm. So I guess those would be the two summary points that from that section about
training using coaching methods, and it's not underestimating. We should not underestimate the effect of the well-being part of drivers, how that actually reflects on how people drive, how they work, and how they live.
Great. Okay. So we will have a look at some of the questions that we've got through from you guys so far. It looks like there's quite a few, so thank you for sending those all through. And we'll answer as many as we can in the last 15 minutes.
We actually have a mountain of them through.
We've got a few. So Rosie asks, is that look in the direction in which you want to drive similar to how football players train to get the ball through the goalposts?
Absolutely. I mean, this is exactly the same. And also golf players, they visualize, where the ball should be going, and then that influences the swing, and with basketball player, football player, all the same thing. The good players actually visualize first, where the ball needs to go, and that has an effect on the motor cortex that actually then creates the movement.
Great. So you got it in one, Rosie.
Just on that question, a question here from Noel. Can you train yourself not to steer where you look?
Yes. I mean, I think it's a very, very good question. I believe, I think you need to look where you want to go. I think you can practice that, and at the place, for example, in curves, these are the tension points, the apex of the curve is a good place to look at. That's the place where you want the information about the curvature. Absolutely.
So we've got a question here from Anthony, which is a very interesting one. So regarding the second insight, which is about calibration, how well people assess their own driving skills, were the findings the same across both genders? Were males and females the same in assessing their own driving skill?
Yeah, that's also an interesting question. It seems there is a small gender effect that males, seem to overestimate their driving skills a little bit more than females. But females overestimate driving skills too.
So we all do it.
We all do it. Yes. Yeah.
But men are slightly worse.
Yeah, and there is also, of course, an age effect. Younger people, when they get into the restricted phase in New Zealand, they experienced an extremely dangerous period of their driving, actually the most dangerous period, when they don't have a supervisor beside them. And then they try to, they very often engage into risky driving behavior.
Mm. And Anthony's got a second question here, which I really like. He's asking about the link between the mental health state, lifestyle sort of situation and safe driving. Does the number of passengers in the car make a difference? He's meaning that if an individual speeds because they don't have high life satisfaction, but they've got other people in the car with them, does empathy then kick in or not? Is that something that's been studied?
Yes, I mean the effect of passengers is very good on the driver. Say, look, we need to slow down and give, have feedback. Very often, young people, peer pressure, of course, can increase with passengers. That's another issue, but very often these days, passengers actually give good feedback to the drivers on their driving.
So it sounds like it does have a moderating effect.
Yes,
the passengers.
Yeah.
And I guess, again, that improves things like connection and feedback and learning and all those sorts of things as well. All right, good question from Frank. But I'm a good driver. I can text and drive safely. I do it all the time. How is it possible to argue against that logic, if that's something someone's saying to you?
Yeah.
Do it all the time.
I mean, I think probably best to argue is with research findings saying that, when people text and drive, their risk is increased by 12 times. So to crash.
Wow.
And that's huge.
That's huge.
I think, when people have this as a habit to text a lot, they will create near misses lots and lots, and they will realize that.
So doing it all the time doesn't necessarily mean keep doing it all the time.
No, and I think that it's a big myth, multitasking, that we can do several tasks at the same time, and driving and texting is just one of the examples of not, we can't do this at the same time.
Okay. So a question from Clint. How would you change a driver from an amber light runner, so someone who goes through a yellow, to an amber light stopper? So somebody who assesses that yellow light as a risk that needs to be taken seriously. How would you go about making that change?
Yeah, again, I would probably see this as a maladaptive behavior, as a behavior in response to an underlying issue. For example, feeling pressure to get to a place very fast. So you need to go through yellow lines in order to save a few minutes. And for me, I think the best therapy would be actually to realize or having insight that first you can't save so much time going through yellow lights, and secondly, why would you want to put your lifestyle that you hopefully rate quite highly at risk, and put other people in danger. And it's just not worth it. That cost-benefit calculation doesn't actually add up.
So it sounds like changing the way their errors in thinking, that it's going to save them a whole bunch of time, and then secondly, reassessing that risk and what are they actually risking with their action.
Yes, and actually also realizing what it does to you. I mean, some people enjoy, of course, taking risks, sensation seekers who are into instant rewards, into pleasure seeking, and this. It is, again, needs insight, for people to realize that this is a problem that they have in response to some underlying psychological issues.
Okay, so something else that might be going on in the background might be affecting you as a driver more than you might think. I guess that comes Anne's question as well. What about texting when stopped at a traffic light? If I know I'm going to be stopped for a while, surely I can check a text. It's kind of similar in that way, isn't it? How much time you're saving by doing the text then or later.
Yes, and you might think you have an eye on the flow, but very often you miss the time, and actually it's time to drive again.
You miss the green.
Yes, absolutely, and then you contribute to the traffic jam that you actually want to avoid.
Right. Ironically.
Yeah.
Okay, well that makes sense. So good question from Sandra. What if I had an unexpectedly late night and I didn't get much sleep? I feel too tired to drive, but I do have to get to work. I can't just skip work because I didn't get enough sleep. Fair. So in this situation, what should I do? And she is talking about a one-off unexpectedly late night. So what would you say to respond to this?
Yes, that's a really, really good question. Sometimes, realities of daily life kicking, and you need to go to work, but you feel really tired. But there are always possibilities. That's when problem-solving skills come in. For example, perhaps you can take a ride, ask a colleague to pick you up, or take perhaps the public transport for a change. There are always, in my view, ways, of finding a safer solution than driving, tired and then basically not enjoying it as well. It's quite painful to drive when you're tired, and lots of near misses and problems happen.
And I suppose recognizing that you're in fact tired is a good first step, right? You were talking earlier about checking in with yourself to notice when you're impaired, and then being able to do something about that, some sort of problem-solving action. But also, she's saying here it's a one-off late night, so perhaps it is a little bit different than being chronically tired every single day. So perhaps there's some preventative measures that might be in place here too.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I would recommend to go into problem-solving mode, and perhaps also consult people. What should I do in this situation? Perhaps also talk with the boss and say, look, if I'm tired, do you want me to drive in the morning, or what is your advice?
That's a good point, because these days a lot of employers are a lot more aware of their responsibilities in terms of the safety of their employees.
Yeah, they will probably say, take it easy this morning, and you can make up for the time that you have missed in the morning a different time point.
They may do, if we're lucky.
Yeah.
Okay, so over to a question from John. Why is driving much slower than the speed limit dangerous? And how does this compare to speeding? I think some people would argue that driving really, really slowly is the safest thing you could do. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the driving slowly, is tempting. When there is a driver who is really, driving slowly, then perhaps some other drivers are tempted to engage into risky maneuvers, overtaking maneuvers. and holding up the traffic is stressful for some people to realize. And yeah, and I mean, that's the question. When is something, when are you driving too slowly? What does actually that mean? Slower or too slow?
Particularly if it's much slower than the cars around you, perhaps you're holding people up, you're going slower than the posted limit.
Yeah, but again, then is when insight should kick in and look, this is not a desired situation. It stresses me out, and perhaps I should avoid that road when people drive faster than I can at this point, and find solutions. Again, I think this is a problem-solving issue.
Okay. I like this question from Tom. Is there a sample survey to be able to identify points of concern in a driver's lifestyle? So particular areas of concern in a driver's lifestyle, to be able to pinpoint possible risks that could occur while driving, so specific things.
Yes, there are quite a few skills that I could share that can be used. Impulse control, for example, emotional control, and lifestyle factors, as I mentioned before, how engaged people are, how meaningful people think life is, and interestingly, pleasure, is instant rewards and pleasure alone. If you only rate high on that scale and very low on engagement and meaning, it's actually a dangerous thing. Then you're very likely to engage in sensation seeking, in risk taking, and so on. But when the rating of pleasure is in combination with good ratings of engagement and meaning, that is like the icing, and is pleasure like the icing on a cake. That actually is very, very good. But it should come with other factors together, not just instant gratification by itself.
So it's the details, the smaller details,
and the balance between all these different factors.
Okay. Well, we've got lots more questions, but I think we might just have time for one last one. And I'm going to go to Venkat. Sorry about the pronunciation if I've got that wrong. Asks, you mentioned that motorcyclists feel vulnerable when they're on the road. How can we make car drivers feel vulnerable, therefore helping them to improve hazard perception and reduce crash risk? Is that the answer, to make them feel less bulletproof?
Yeah, that's it's a really good question, particularly in the climate of creating death-proof cars. The Volvo, for example, said, I think after 2025 or so, there will be not a single person dying in a Volvo car.
Wow, that's quite a claim, isn't it?
So that means absolutely not vulnerable anymore, because whatever people do, it will not cause injury or death. Yeah, and how does that then change behavior? Do they take so much risk? When drivers know that they can't really get hurt.
Well, they think they can't get hurt.
Yes. And the other way, I'm not sure how we can make drivers feel more vulnerable. Yeah, that's a really difficult question.
Maybe with the calibration you were talking about earlier and teaching people to assess their skills, if you realise you aren't as amazing behind the wheel as you always thought, I imagine that would help you feel less vulnerable on the road. More vulnerable
on the road, yeah. Actually see your limitations and human factors that affect driving.
So it sounds like there's a lot of different factors that all play a part when it comes to driving, and like we said at the beginning, it's probably one of the most risky things that most of us do every single day. So I guess we'll sign off there, and looks like we're within time.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very much. This is probably one of the easiest webinars I've had to do since I've been running the NRSUP. It's not often I get to hand over and sit back and relax, so thank you both very much.
Thank you.
And for those who are still listening in, thank you very much. We did have a mountain of questions, so I do apologise we couldn't get through them all. It was I've been dropping them all across, so I will follow up with them and see if they have time to answer some of them. We also have a pile of other webinars up and coming. So there's one looking at how sleep plays a vital role in development of type 2 diabetes in July, and a great one with Rio Tinto looking at the CRM bow tie process on the 24th of July. So I hope you can join them. I'll be back on the front foot playing the role of Nadine. And as always, keep in touch with the NRSP website. And thank you once again to our presenters today. And of course, thank you to our audience.
Thanks so much.